Cool. Well, welcome back to Drop It In Surf Show episode 2. We made it to 2. I'm so excited. Today is April 29th, 2020. We are recording from Belmarin Keys, California and Corte Madera, California. My name is Rob Case. I am a paddling coach and I teach surfers of all levels all around the world how to paddle with less effort, how to paddle faster, and how to prevent injury. And with me, as always, for 2 episodes, is my friend and colleague, Jim Cegelnik. Hey, Jim, how's it going?
Good, Rob. How are you?
I'm doing all right, man. I had a good week. I tried out some new tech, and I know tech is right up your alley, man.
That's right. Yeah, I'm pretty good at it.
I got 2 new things. I got a watch that can track us out in open water. So for all like the big wave surfers and the paddle boarders and longboarders, we can really stretch out the playing field and record some different data, which is really cool. And then I got this thing. I kind of jerry-rigged it so it just goes around your head. It's supposed to go around goggles for a swimmer, but it's got this bone conductor here, and it tells you where to go out in the lagoon. It's crazy. It's like, you're 5 meters off. Go to 1 o'clock, and you're like, you turn to 1 o'clock, and then you're like, yeah, you're back on track. And so it actually helps them go around the lagoon without me having to yell at them.
Oh, that's very cool. So you like put in some predestined kind of path on your app or whatever, and then it kind of tells you if you're on or off from that.
Yep, exactly.
Wow.
Exactly.
Cool
and
stuff.
It's pretty accurate. When I was testing it, there were a couple times that I was kind of doing circles, and I'm sure my neighbors were like, what the heck is he doing? He must be drunk, because I'm on this paddleboard just kind of doing these circles trying to find they call it the waypoint. And so that was a learning curve for me to use fewer waypoints.
Yeah, that sounds awesome, man.
Yeah, that was pretty cool. So pretty good week.
Yeah, good.
What have you been up to?
Yeah, since we last spoke, I've been still in the clinic working. We're doing telehealth at the clinic, which is, just all video and phone appointments, and doing some kind of piecemeal hospital training, doing triage, which is just super interesting in itself because it's very uncomfortable for me. Like, okay, if you have this scenario, this is what this looks like. These like directions I might go as a sports therapist, like that require gloves and a mask and a splash shield. I'm like, man, I didn't sign up for this, So, so every week I get a little spooked, but as you already know, in Marin County the cases are pretty low, and the governor's talking about this staged plan of opening things back up. So, yeah. It's looking hopeful that someone like me probably won't even be utilized at that kind of triage level, but so that's good.
Yeah, that's helpful. We have a client that is on the front lines. She has been treating COVID patients at Marin General, and she sounded pretty tired, but she also sounded like she needed a surf break really badly.
Is that Diana?
Dina.
Yeah. Well,
your neighbor isn't she like right near you?
She moved. Yeah, she moved.
Okay.
Yeah, I haven't seen her in a long time. And I spoke with her on the phone about something unrelated. She had called me and we caught up. But
nice.
Yeah, that's right. I totally forgot she was even out there in general.
Well, so am I saying it right? Are you in Corte Madera or are you in Green Bay? Because Lori was like, "Oh, he's in Green Bay," which I'm like, "What's the difference?"
Couldn't tell you. Maybe like a 30-foot distance.
Yeah.
Yeah. People, I'm technically in Green Bay, but people call it Larkspur and Corte Madera all the time. So okay. I think Larkspur and Corte Madera are twin cities, and there's probably some like legal thing that I don't fully understand where they're like joined municipalities or something. But Green Bay is essentially where the ferry building is in Larkspur. It just gets called Larkspur quite a bit. So someone much smarter than I could probably explain the difference, but I don't fully understand it.
Right. Now, that I never knew that. I always knew that as Larkspur and Corte Madera.
It's kind of like if I called Belmarin Keys Novato.
Yeah.
You'd be like, well, it's Novato, but it's Belmarin Keys.
Got it.
And I'd be like, man, I just don't understand it.
Yeah. Oh, and there's another one. I'm also in Ignacio. So it's like
Man.
It's all messed up.
Yeah, we got to bring in our attorneys to really explain this.
So I'm gonna redo that. Recording from Greenbrae, California.
There you go. There you go.
Well, welcome back to the show. We made it to episode 2. I'm very excited about that. For those of you that are just tuning in on this episode, to give you a little bit of background on what we do, we drop a little bit of math, a little bit of science in with a whole lot of surfing, and hopefully you walk away learning something that you can use or at least think a little bit more about. Pretty cool, I think. I'm super excited about today because I went between like 4 different topics in the last week, and just to let everyone know, this show is brought to you by our sponsors, saltypt.com and surfingpaddling.com. We're really branching out, Jim.
Yeah, it's been amazing how much money's come in since the last episode. I thought I was going to be late writing you a check for this this podcast, but it's just amazing.
It's nuts. And you know what? You don't know this yet, but it went to a whole new level in this episode. You'll find out later. It's awesome. Very exciting.
I can't wait.
But before we get to that, let's talk topics. So last week I said that maybe I would do the timing of the sprint in this episode, and then later and over the weekend I thought of something else, and right up until yesterday I had my topic, and I was like, I'm going to talk about this. It's going to be awesome. And then I got an email, and it totally blew everything out of the water. It was an email that it was from a guy he's currently in module 3 of the online course. And in module 3 and 4, for those of you that don't know, that's where we talk about propulsion, and we talk about what moves us through the water. And in it, I talk about this kind of abstract way of teaching that you want to learn to develop a skill of feeling water and, quote, holding water. And we kind of talked about it last week with anchoring the hand, right? Mm-hmm. And it's a very abstract concept. It does have a lot of science behind it. He's like, yeah, all of your other techniques has all this science behind it. And then you get to this and it's like touchy-feely, like feel the water, kumbaya stuff. And I'm like, yeah, yes and no. There's a ton of science behind it, but it's way more complex to really explain. So this is a perfect venue to try to explain it, because there's been more recent explanations of it that really kind of break it down more clearly. And this way we can at least kind of have a back and forth Q&A about it. So the reason I teach the way I teach online is that it's a faster way of getting to the same point. But what I was pulling up, and I've been following this guy for a couple of years, Jim, I'm wondering if you know this book by Anthony Blasevich. I think I'm saying his last name correctly. It's Sports Biomechanics.
I don't think I've seen that one.
You're going to love this. You're going to have to borrow this, because there's a whole chapter in walking and gait biomechanics, which I know when we first met, you're like, yeah, I've done a bunch of studies on gait. And I was like, that is super interesting. So I think you'd really enjoy this.
Yeah, I went to, I think I said this last time, but I went to Chapman University down in Orange County, which was relatively close to USC in what's called the Rancho Lab. And essentially the Gait book of my profession was done there. And as students, we got to go to that lab at Rancho and kind of see how it all worked, which was, oh my gosh, it was just so like simple and complicated at the same time. Essentially, you have like a force plate on the floor that's the size of a room. and people walk across it, and like, you have a lab hand kind of reading the pressure per step per when the foot hits the ground at what stage of the gait cycle. And it's that lab alone is really, I wouldn't be surprised if that guy kind of cherry picked from that lab, but like that's where we got to know really just some basic foundations of gait. Like, okay, you need about 10 degrees of dorsiflexion to walk normal. You need about 65 degrees of knee flexion to walk normal, and so forth. And these muscles activate at this stage of gait cycle. So if you see deficits at that phase of the gait cycle, you're already thinking, what are the requirements per the stage, which really, as a clinician, just kind of gives you clues on where somebody's problem might be. It's just another data point that we use, combined with kind of like how most people would do. Oh, I got an MRI of my knee, and it shows a torn meniscus or whatever, and we could go, yeah, and that's kind of linked to how you're walking. And what I found when I put you up on the table and did all these other tests, it's this like preponderance of evidence that says, yeah, okay, we should do this to impact that. So
That's cool, and it got me thinking how it might relate to surfing.
yeah.
We talk a lot. I know Tim Brown talks a lot about posture and how it could affect your surfing. A lot of people talk about posture and how it can affect your surfing. You as well. I wonder even if it could be linked to gait and how we walk even.
Yeah, that'd be an interesting kind of concept. What do you kind of thinking on that?
I would love to put a force plate on a surfboard too.
Yeah.
And see, do a comparison of the pros versus us normal people on pressure, but also, like you said, the mobility down in that region, dorsiflexion, and all the other big words you used.
Yeah, sorry. Sometimes I get carried away. If I can kind of riff off that, one of our mutual clients, April Denny, who is, for those of you listening, April Denny is got a bachelor's in kinesiology, and she went to Cal Poly in San Luis Obispo, and she maybe had some interest in becoming a sports physical therapist. And so, she kind of comes to me and asks questions about the career. And I had a chat with her today, and she recently, or in the past, got accepted to San Marcos down south. And she's going to pursue her master's now in kinesiology. And so she was like, Jim, I need to come up with a thesis before I go into this school. And what do you think I should do? And I was like, hey, whatever the hell you want. It's not my thesis, But, I know that's why she didn't call me. She kind of wanted to... she knows I read surfing evidence and or the literature, and I practice in sports. And so to your point, like, I was like, yeah, what I've always been interested in is we have like all this literature that like bases, the whole basis is to help people in pain, right? And so like there's a good amount of literature that supports, for example, the thoracic spine's mobility, specifically with extension. And so the thoracic spine being the part of your spine in the middle of your back, and your cervical spine anchors to your thoracic spine. And then you got this kind of shoulder joint that's a little bit in between of those two. And so if we were talking about the thoracic spine, if we improve that mobility, we can improve the function or how the neck feels. So we can make the neck hurt less if we make the thoracic spine move more. And we can actually make the shoulder indirectly lift higher if we improve the thoracic extension. And we can make the shoulder feel better too. So like, when I do this simple thing, a lot of complicated things are happening. And, theoretically, there's thoracic extension happening there a little bit as I lift my arm. And I said, April, like what would be kind of a neat study is what if you took something that applies clinically. And so if I was feeding you an idea of interest, like, hey, this is my interest, what if you could show that you improve thoracic spine mobility and that impacts paddle time? That would be awesome. Now, that's just my idea, but like, going back to your point, you can pick up thoracic spine stiffness and gait. So is it all connected? Yeah, it can be directly or indirectly. And what I mean by that is sometimes we tie too much to gait and we lead people down a road that is like maybe irrelevant, but like I would argue that a good musculoskeletal therapist can see a stiff rib cage and thoracic spine in gait, which might translate into a stiff objective measure, i.e. that thoracic spine is stiff with extension. Let me make it move better, and now my neck and shoulder move and function better. So that research doesn't exist, but there could be a neat link there.
Yeah. And I think that, the guys down at Cal State San Marcos, Jeff and Sean, they're awesome to kind of foster something like that, and any of her ideas, they'll be pumped on anything that's related to surfing. I'll tell you that.
Yeah, I was pumped for her. She had some other ideas that were really good too. Things that I don't know a lot about, like some of this ice bath stuff, Wim Hof is super popular, obviously, and breath training has kind of become, I don't know if popular is the right word, because breath training has kind of always been a thing, but nowadays with Instagram and some of the social media, you see like maybe some of the marketing aspects of how it's been like maybe marketed to groups of people like surfers, and I think it makes perfect sense, like especially if you're kind of pushing your boundary to get involved with bigger waves, you want to be able to hold your breath for safety reasons. And if you can learn breath training and that helps your chronic low back pain too, then that's awesome. But she was talking about like she wanted to further understand maybe how cold water therapy affects the sensitivity of the nervous system, and try to apply that to surfing in some sense. And I was like, wow, that's pretty... Have no idea how you'd set that up, but it sounds awesome.
only a former Ocean Beach lifeguard would think that way.
Totally. So, yeah, so she's one to kind of keep in your back pocket, and I actually set her up with a couple of our colleagues down in San Diego who are also physical therapists, Elise Cortini and Shane Carpenter, who are awesome physical therapists, and maybe they can assist her down the road with setting up some sort of research design. And selfishly, I did that so I can kind of keep my finger on the pulse. So when the results come in, like I'll be second in line to hear about it.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really cool. Mm-hmm. That was kind of an aside, but I love that. Yeah. And I know we were trying to get April to one of our level 1 weekends just to kind of feel it out. But I'm stoked that she's going to pursue that. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
And look at you stepping into like the mentor role.
Yeah, I know, man. I'm getting old.
All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and proceed because I'm very, very excited about this topic. Yeah. So I'm trying to think of how to start this. I think when we talk about the feeling and the holding of water, let's first explain what is it that you're feeling. Okay, so I'm going to show you, but for those that are listening, I'm going to try and explain it. So as you get into your underwater arm stroke in what I call the front propulsive phase, you have your forearm and your hand as your paddling blade, and it's proceeding backwards through the stroke towards your feet. So what's happening, what you're feeling is water particles that actually slow us down, that we focus on module 1 and 2, which is basically drag, right? So these water molecules that slow us down, we can also use to propel us forward based off of the third law of motion, which is that for every action, there's an equal opposite reaction. So if we want to move forward, we have to push backwards against those water particles. And that's what we call drag force. And so we use basically those water molecules are colliding with what we call the ventral side of our hand, which is our palm side of our hand and our forearm. So that palm side of our hand and forearm is the ventral side, and all those water molecules are colliding with this surface area, and then we push against it and it brings us forward, just like kind of a sup paddle would as well. Mm-hmm. Pretty simple. Mm-hmm. Now, what's happening during that, the science behind what's happening during that is that as your arm proceeds in the backwards direction, it creates kind of like a hole behind it on what we call the dorsal side. The dorsal side is like the back of the hand side of the arm. And that hole, it has a lower pressure than the ventral side, which has a higher pressure. And in physics, high pressure fluids, when we're talking about fluids, high pressure likes to go to low pressure. And so what tends to happen is around the arm, around the hand, around the arm, this flow of water is trying, all this high pressure is trying to get to the low pressure. So it's going around the arm and trying to fill in that low pressure, but the arm is continuing to go backwards. And it's that pressure that I want to talk to you a little bit more about, because that first drag forces, I think people kind of understand that really easily. But to step up your propulsion game, to step up really, when I want to say power in your stroke, there's another force that we tap into in water called lift forces. And the lift forces are primarily have to do with this pressure differential between high pressure and low pressure. And it's a concept called the Bernoulli Effect. Now, over the years, the Bernoulli Effect has been studied in swimming. Since the early 60s, Doc Councilman started to try to explain where lift was coming from in addition to drag forces in the propulsive phases of the stroke. And in pretty much every single decade, there's new research coming out. We finally got, I think Blasevich does finally a pretty good job at explaining Bernoulli Effect without totally confusing it. Because over the years, I was always confused by it, because they always try to like talk about like an airfoil and lift and it has to do with airplanes and wings. Well, the way he explains the Bernoulli Effect is a little bit different. So let's just explain what the Bernoulli Effect is. The Bernoulli Effect basically says that there's a coexisting relationship between the flow of water and the speed at which water flows, so the kinetic energy of that flow of water, with pressure and potential energy. So there's three things that coexist together. There's potential energy of the water, there's kinetic energy of the water, which is basically how fast it's going, and there's the pressure that is being experienced with the water. Now, most people associate Bernoulli Effect with strictly when there's a high, fast flow of water, there's low pressure. And they think that it's always like that, and vice versa. If there's a slow moving water, there's very high pressure. But there's something in math that we call a proof that basically disproves just that one understanding of that inverse relationship. For example, if water was going down a hill, right, it's going fast, the water is flowing fast, but the pressure hasn't changed, right? So what has changed is the potential energy. It's using gravity. So there's this other kind of variable in this thing, in this equation. And all we really need to understand is that there's this coexistence between pressure and water flow and speed. It doesn't necessarily always work inverse, but the Bernoulli Effect, mostly when you see it, there's this inverse relationship. Cool? We following it so far?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
All right, cool. So now we've already talked about how there's pressure difference between the ventral side or the palm side of our arm and the dorsal side or the back side of our hand, right? So you have high pressure on the palm side and there's low pressure over here, and the water's trying to get to the low pressure. And what's happening with the drag forces is that all these little water flow around the arm is creating these little vortexes, and that's creating this thing that we can hold on to and push against and moves us forward. But there's another force that's helping us move forward, which is the lift forces through the Bernoulli Effect. What they found, which was really interesting, is that up here in the upper part of the arm, since it's closer to the axis of rotation, the upper arm is actually moving through the motion slower than the hand is from front to back, because the hand is furthest from the axis of rotation, which is our shoulder, right? So kind of like, I think of this as if you've ever ice skated or roller skated and you've done like the circle thing where like everyone holds hands and you kind of skate in a circle. If you've ever been on the inside, you're like, this is super boring because you're going really, really slowly. But if you've ever been like the 10th person down in the chain, you're like flying fast, right? So that's the angular velocity concept where you're furthest from that point of rotation, you're going to be going super fast. But if you're close to that axis of rotation, you're going to be going really slow. So does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So since our upper arm is closest to our axis of rotation, it's actually moving from front to back slowest. And because of that, because that water flow is slow, guess what's happening to the pressure up here? It's high,
increasing. Yeah.
right? Okay, so even though on the dorsal side, it's lower than the ventral side, from top to bottom, the top of the arm has a higher pressure than the bottom of the arm or the hand part. So there's two separate, well, there's many pressure gradients, but let's just two different areas of pressure gradients. There's the ventral side to the dorsal side, which we've already talked about. So the palm side to the back side of the hand. But there's also from the top of your arm area down to your hand, there's another pressure gradient. And this is really exciting, okay? So because of this, remember, high pressure likes to go to low pressure. And so what happens is this low pressure actually forces pressure down and increases the high pressure on the palm part of your stroke. So not only are you pushing against drag forces, but you're also getting lift in the direction you want to go because of this pressure gradient going down the dorsal side or the back side of your arm, which is nuts. And there were two different studies that Blasevich actually pointed out. One, let me go to the page so you can kind of get a visual, Jim, and then I'll explain it. So if you take a look here, this was back in 2002. This study was done to try to explain the Bernoulli effect in swimming. And so what they did is they tied little strings to the dorsal side or the back side of hand and arm all the way up the arm. And in a wind tunnel, you would expect that these strings would just go perpendicular to the arm like you see in A here, right? And so they just kind of stick up as you go from front to back through your arm stroke, right? That's what we would expect. But the most amazing thing happened. It proved the Bernoulli effect was actually working. The strings did not do that. The strings actually laid fairly close to the arm in the direction of the hand. So instead of going out at about 90 degrees from the arm, as the arm proceeded from front to back, it actually pressed down into the arm almost all the way down, and it went from basically the upper arm down to the hand, proving that there was a pressure gradient from the upper arm going down to the hand on the dorsal side of the arm, on the back side of the arm. Wild, right? So this was a pretty remedial test on this Bernoulli effect. So later in 2016, they got more tech involved, and they really showed this pressure differential here. So this was done at a slow swimming speed, and you can see that the ventral pressure was very high. That's the palm side of our arm. And on the dorsal side, it was a lot lower, but you could see it's, there's this kind of big gap in here, right? This difference, because drag and lift is created not because it's an individual pressure, but it's the difference between high pressure and low pressure is what we feel. That's what is most important here. That is what creates lift. That is what creates the drag forces. When they're going faster, when they're sprinting versus going slowly in terms of speed, the overall pressures of the ventral side and the dorsal side are lower because now their moving velocity is higher, so water flow is higher, the pressures are lower. However, the pressure differences between the ventral and the dorsal side are much higher. So that solid line here is the differences, and that's the ventral. So what does all this mean? Is that when we end up going faster, we're actually, if we do it correctly, we're tapping into two different types of forces, drag forces and lift forces. And it's what we're feeling, what that skill of feeling and holding water really is. It's the pressure differential between the ventral and the dorsal side and Bernoulli effect combined together, which I thought is just awesome. Right? So when we really want a lot of speed, I teach the deep catch stroke. Why? Because the deep catch sends the arm further from the axis of rotation. If you're further from the axis of rotation, that hand differential from the upper arm or the upper elbow is a lot longer, a lot further away than if you're using the S stroke, which is I teach for the energy conservation stroke. Right? You know, so lift forces exist in both, but to really get true high acceleration with high effectiveness, then you want to use the deep catch stroke and maximize that pressure differential, which is really cool. Now, there's one more thing. There's one more thing that I need to explain here, and it goes back to where I started with this. So I started by saying that that drag forces are really a function of action-reaction, right? So for every action, we have equal and opposite reaction. So we push against those water molecules backwards and we go forward. The second law of motion states that force is equal to mass times acceleration, which essentially means that if we want to accelerate more, we just got to use more force. But what surfers don't understand is that you can overpower water. If you push too hard, you're going to push right through that high pressure system, and it's going to do what we call slipping. So that's essentially what slipping is you're pushing through that differential, and you're not getting that differential at all. You're pushing right through that high pressure system on the ventral side of your arm. And so you're not getting the same effect forward. So one way of thinking about this is that for when we think about action-reaction, the trick here, the overall trick to really get the maximum distance per stroke or maximum, absolute maximum propulsion is the energy that we put in to push backwards. That's our action, right? The energy, if we put 100% energy in, the best swimmers and paddlers in the world will only get 80% of that energy used to move them forward. And then the other 20% is really used just to move water, because water is not solid. Water is a liquid. So we can't push against it the same we can against a solid. So some math people are out there going, wait, you said equal and opposite, which means I put in 100% energy this way, I better get 100% result, right? Well, you do, but only 80% of that actually moves you forward, and the other 20% is wasted. You're just moving water. It's not wasted. You have to do it in order to move forward. Now, those are the best swimmers and paddlers that really have this idea of how to identify that pressure differentiation. So what hope do we have being regular folks that are just learning this and that haven't learned this feeling of water and this holding water? Well, they're probably more like 60-40, where there's a lot of slipping happening in their stroke. And this is why, is that they just haven't developed that identification of the pressure differential and gone through those motions time and time again. And so to give viewers and anybody else watching or listening something to really think about, there are drills that I teach called sculling. And this goes back to the original question. He's sitting there looking at these sculling drills going, what the heck are these sculling drills? They don't teach me. Like, they're like moving arms like this, and you're just going back and forth and back and forth. You're not actually going through the arm stroke. And they have no direct correlation to the motion of the arm stroke or the biomechanics of the underwater arm stroke. But what they teach you is they teach you what that pressure differential feels like, what that lift feels like when you're going through it. And as you can see on screen, people listening won't be able to see this, but you see how I go out, I tilt my hands up as I go out, and I tilt my hands in with my thumb up as I come in. And that creates lift. And so I'll put a video on the blog that shows some of this. But basically, by getting in the water and practicing this a lot, especially with your eyes closed and you're really keying in on the kinesthetic cues, the more you do it, the less you have to think about it in the moment. And that's really the key with sprinting. The underwater arm stroke happens so quickly. There's so many other variables that we're thinking about when we catch a wave. We can't think about this. We can't think about how we're feeling water in the moment. You have to train it outside of that moment. You have to train it to become subconscious. And these are drills that you can use to train it. So kind of a long explanation of what this abstract concept of feeling water is in scientific form. So what do you think of that, Jim? Have you heard that before?
Not put that eloquently, no. I don't think anyone on planet Earth has.
I'm so happy.
Yeah, but yeah, man, I have so many thoughts on that. You're right. Like when I took physics 100 years ago, we learned about the Bernoulli principle, and of course they draw this. Everything revolves around this lift or design around an airplane wing, and why like one length is a little longer than the other to create this like speed of air and pressure differential. I mean, it's kind of like, a pilot or someone could probably explain it much more eloquently than that. But like, it's so neat to kind of hear like kind of the different maybe force vectors of like, yeah, there's drag here, or there's velocity happening here with a pressure differential, and there's also velocity happening here with a pressure differential. And I've had the privilege to work with you and get my own paddle assessed, and I think a sign of a good coach is like he or she can know all that complicated stuff is happening, but you can give one small verbal cue and say, feel water, or pull the ladder rung, or whatever it is, and it does that, and to kind of tie this back into your client's email, like the touchy-feely stuff, like, I would argue like, yeah, it's okay to be touchy-feely as long as it gets you to do what you want to do, right? Like you don't necessarily need to understand the science of it, which it's super cool to nerd out, obviously, but you need to understand that like what most people call muscle memory, what I would probably call maybe a proprioceptive awareness of what that pressure differential feels like. Because if you're just listening to this and you've never had your paddle assessed by someone like Rob, you don't probably know what slipping even feels like, right? So think of that. Like, I paddled for 20 plus years before you told me I was slipping.
Yeah.
Right. And so I'm like, well, what the heck is slipping? And so it was pretty neat how you went about it. It was like, okay, here, let's kind of like we would do in the clinic, like, let's assess how you move. Okay. Come back over here. Let's look at the footage. This is what you're doing. You see that? And then try it with this simple cue, and then go back out. And I think for me, the cue was, I was overreaching. And so like we did the catch up drill with the fists, right? And then paddling felt different. And then we came back, looked at the footage, and it was like, oh yeah, I can kind of see that. And so as a motor learner, I'm building that mental kind of connection, that proprioceptive awareness of like, yeah, I can't fully explain it, but I know it feels different. And now it's time for me to kind of like take that out in the ocean and try to apply it. And I think, that's kind of neat, you teaching like that. I mean, not to, get your ego through the roof, but like, in my mind, that's a sign of a good coach, because it's so easy to overcoach, you know?
Well, everyone learns differently. So some people's cues are absolutely different than yours. Like you keyed in on the anchor and on a couple other things. So there's auditory cues as well, and there's visual cues. So I try to teach the kinesthetic cues, like what does it feel like, and that's ultimately when you get down to getting to the point where you don't have to think about paddling anymore, it should all be kinesthetic, right? But subconsciously kinesthetic in feeling. But you can always kind of give yourself checks. Like I give myself checks all the time, like, oh, that was a bad stroke. And I can immediately feel it, or I can see it, or I can hear it. And so I think even with what you do too, because you're very hands-on, like manipulating people's arms, you're still trying to figure out what it feels to them when you're evaluating them, which I think is really similar. It's kind of like a puzzle, or like a puzzle or a game that you're trying to figure out what is this person feeling versus what they're saying they're feeling.
Yeah. I mean, you're absolutely right. What draws me to do what I do is it's kind of like being a detective in a way, right? Like
that's what I was trying to get at. You see, you always come up with the better words.
Well, that's because I'm dumber than you.
No. You have a much higher degree than I do.
Yeah, well, shoot. I don't know if that means much with this, but yeah, like, so you can come to me with a shoulder pain, and I can look at your posture. I can look at how you move, like lifting your arm or doing push-ups, or hey, Rob, show me an activity that reproduces your pain, and then I can push and pull and do all these tests to try to reproduce your pain and put the whole story together. But like, that concept of like motion analysis is a really, I think it's a really valuable tool, and it really helps with, I think, well, number one, part of the detective work, which is like, okay, so maybe there are some things with your paddle that have led your rotator cuff in your shoulder to get a bit compromised, and that's why the tendon is irritated. So we could do these conventional things in therapy, which are like, we've all probably heard of like the rubber band exercises or a little bit of massage or stretch, but maybe that's not enough for some people that want to keep pursuing surfing. Maybe they do need a biomechanical kind of tweak to their the way they're paddling to really just make the whole system work efficient. Things that I kind of trip out on, apropos to that are, so I've been a PT 12 years or so, and early in my career, I was kind of led to believe that movement quality was the root of all evil, right? And so what I mean by that is if I go, hey, Rob, you got knee pain? Let me see a squat. And you show me like a little, what we call collapse, or femoral collapse, valgus, they're pretty much the same thing. And so you could Google right now squats, and you'll read all this stuff about how genu or knee collapse is like the root cause of knee pain. But then, you could look at like some of the best surfers in the world, Tom Kerr and Kelly Slater, look at their back knee when they bottom turn. It's like fully valgused and collapsed. And, you're like, whoa, wait a minute. But like, there's so much dissonance in my head. And so there's like, what I've kind of come to realize is, at least clinically, like, movement quality has probably a variance, right? Like I can line up 10 people and like do the thing that like practitioners do and go, hey, okay, let me line that up. And you know what? One leg's going to be longer. One shoulder is going to sit a little higher. Yeah. You're probably going to have a little scoliosis if you let me find it. And those are normal variances that mean nothing, right? And so we can watch people walk. Same thing. I could point out all the nuanced differences, but the point is none of those things are pathological. And so there's got to be some kind of like variance of normal, and to kind of tie it back, movement quality helps people that are in a lot of pain. So if you came to me and you're like, man, I'm in so much pain. It's like I could barely move my arm. And I say, sit upright and think about this. Oh yeah, that dropped my pain. That's a very helpful tool for you now until you get over this, right? And then movement quality is really helpful with like what you and I do, especially you, which is kind of the performance aspect, And so like, case in point, like, I surfed 20 years without shoulder pain, and I was not paddling with probably the best form, but maybe I had a little bit more fitness, or my body developed an adaptation to my poor mechanics. Whereas if someone in their 40s jumped in with my crap form, it would have overloaded their shoulder quicker because their tendons wouldn't be used to that kind of stress, So, so that's kind of how I maybe like, I think we kind of like riff off each other, is like you're the biomechanical side, which has a lot of value on that end and this end, the painful person and the person that wants to get better.
Yeah.
Right. And that's not most people I see in the clinic coming off the street, where I could go, hey, do X, Y, and Z, you're better. Right. And where I think you really thrive is those people that go, you know what, I'm really struggling with paddling because every time I go to paddle, my shoulder either really hurts or I'm just not catching waves. So pain versus performance, there's probably something to those biomechanics.
Well, it reminds me of something you said last week, is it's never black and white. It's never, it's never and always. There's always some gray in there, and the body adapts. Like, like you said, it's amazing to me, the body, how it adapts to certain things, and it creates, and that's, if you think about that, going back to, the caveman and how we've evolved, if we didn't have adaptation, we probably wouldn't be here.
Totally. There's a lot to be said for that. And sometimes in my world, a little bit of research kind of sets the cultural trajectory down this kind of crazy path, going back to like some of that valgus collapse. Like, don't get me wrong. Like, I'm not going to train people in the clinic to exercise valgus collapse. All I'm saying is a lot of those studies are based off people with pain. And we know people in pain move differently. And the question is, we don't necessarily know, do they move differently because they're in pain, or did that movement quality lead to pain?
Right, totally,
right?
Absolutely.
And so it's kind of that.
And you know what?
Chicken or egg.
This salty moment has been brought to you by Salty PT. And now a word from Tomas, the toy train.
I want to be like my friend Gordon, big and strong, so I can be a really useful toy train. So I was thinking on going to saltypt.com.
I don't think he trains toy trains.
But he said he trains surfers that aren't just injured to be more mobile and strong, in addition to rehab patients.
Yeah, I don't think that includes toy trains.
What a jerk.
SaltyPT.com, helping surfers and now toy trains become stronger and more mobile.
Man, that was good. That was really good. Not far from the truth either.
Dude, I didn't know you had such a high budget for your ads.
Well, ever since that last podcast, the money's just been, I can't keep it out of the mailbox, so I sprung a little bit.
I think you're gonna have to show that one to Gavin.
Yeah, that's pretty good, man.
That was my Gavin doing the voiceover.
I was just going to ask if that was one of your kids.
Yeah.
That was awesome.
So Jim, you got something to share with us?
Yeah, I guess I had a question kind of related back to your story. I don't know if it's worth kind of going there.
Go there. Who cares?
Okay. So if we kind of had to ask a follow-up question to what you were just talking about, what slipping is, and kind of tie it to those pressures, like Rob, what's kind of like maybe some of the more common mistakes that you see that lead to slipping? Because maybe you can describe it in a way for those people who haven't trained with you on what that feels like and what they can do to kind of better themselves.
That's a really good question, and I'll try to break it down into two sections: one for dry land training and one for in water training. Because slipping is something that this pressure differential you can't actually simulate on land at all, and that's why I'm a big proponent of getting in the water. Now, the deep catch stroke it takes a lot of energy, and it requires a very strong shoulder, joint, and girdle in order to not hurt it more, because because your arm is now further away from the axis of rotation, or the fulcrum at this point, it's putting a lot of pressure on those tiny little rotator cuff muscles. And so there are things that you can do, like what you do with your clients and people do in gyms, to strengthen the shoulder in order to prepare it for that type of stroke. But in terms of slipping itself, that and learning that skill, that pressure differential, you've got to get in the water and just do the sculling and get those repetitions of focus practice in the water. I think the biggest mistake that people have is they think, in order to go faster, to accelerate more, I'm just going to lift more weights. And we talked about this last week, how there is a good correlation between that. But they focus so much on that, and they overpower water. And that's the concept, that 80-20, where when they're overpowering water, they're only moving themselves 60% of the way, and they're pushing water 40%. And so they feel like they're doing a lot, but they're not getting the same return on that investment, on that energy. And so in order to compensate for that, they work out harder, and they increase their endurance, or they increase their strength. And they're still missing a ton. It's kind of like, I give the analogy, like if I was the Incredible Hulk and I could just go on forever and I was super strong, but if I had like 20 parachutes tied behind me, it's probably easier to cut the parachutes to go faster than to get even stronger, right? Yeah. So in terms of mistakes, I think the biggest thing for slipping is overpowering the water, or thinking that stronger is always better, or harder is always better. Because what Blasevich basically proved is that it's not pushing harder against the ventral side or the palm side of your arm that actually makes you go faster. It's getting more of a difference between this side and the ventral side and the dorsal side. And it's actually the dorsal side that creates the lift. It's the lack of pressure on this side is what actually creates the pressure on the other side. So it's kind of a different way of thinking about it that way. So having more finesse rather than strength at certain moments. And we talked about it last week too, how, especially when people are in the moment catching waves, they're like, oh, I gotta push hard. And that's like the number one thing they're told is just go hard. And I argue in level 2, and I try to work people down from this. I say, well, start at like 60% effort and just do it right. Do it right at 60% at the right time with the right technique, and you'll save energy, and you'll probably have a clearer mind to drop into a wave. And then other things they can think about, like to identify whether they're slipping. Auditory cues are things like sound. Hearing your stroke underwater, hearing that whoosh underwater is actually a bad thing. That's actually you slipping. So one way you can practice that, or to get that hearing, is if you're a dead stop and you take a super hard stroke, you're going to hear all that cavitation happening, and that'll cue you, oh, that's what slipping is.
That's really cool stuff. It makes me think I need to call April Denny and redesign a study for her.
Oh,
but seriously, like what if you can take that complicated science and turn it into like a sentence that you say to people, like if you were able to read those pressures and then take people that are untrained and just say, pull the ladder rung, put your hand in the mud, whatever cue it might be, and just see how it almost like auto corrects. That'd be a really interesting thing. Yeah. Or the other analogy that I use for a lot is gears on a car. Totally. So you have, if you're going from gear 1 to 4, you're going to spin the tires. You're going to use a ton of energy, but not really go anywhere. Eventually, friction will set and you'll go. But with paddling, it's more about building up that momentum and to that maximum hull speed. That's a whole nother episode. But things that I think, crossing over to the things that you can train surfers with, along those same lines, is not only are we trying to build up our overall speed from gear 1 to gear 6, is that within the individual stroke itself, we're also trying to do a progressive stroke from front to back. So progressive force from front to back, so we don't slip too soon.
And because as soon as you slip, you lose the chance to get that pressure differential back. It's gone. And because it happens so quickly, you can't get it back until the next stroke. And everybody slips a little. You'll even see in the videos of me sprinting, I'm slipping a little. But it's a little compared to a lot given the speed that I'm going. So I think the things that you can work on in the gym is working on motions that get you to go from kind of a low amount of weight or pressure to a high amount of weight and pressure. And that's why I like the therapy bands, because you get that gradual increase in strength from front to back and then back to front. And you're kind of working it both ways. But I don't know, are there any other techniques that might like teach that to somebody, like that progressive force from front to back?
Yeah, I like where your head's at with the band. I think we're in like kind of a domain of exercise that really hasn't been discussed nor researched. But, you know, if we had to kind of tie it to the concept of motor learning, it's kind of, it probably has like some relevance to sport specific training, like kind of how we would think about skateboarding and how that relates to surfing. Like, okay, just feel how this turn feels and then, you know, repeat that a bunch of times and then try to take it to surfing. But like, I think probably like you'd probably be the best person to kind of come up with that answer. Like if you can train me and get me to feel that, or get a person hypothetically to feel what you're talking about, and then you can kind of like, you know, get someone over a ball and be doing kind of like the exercises we talked about last time. And there might be some magic into how they're applying pressure to the band and at what cadence to make it feel like the most like the correct pressure differential that you described.
Right.
You know, so in essence, it's biofeedback, you know, and there'd be, you know, I guess the theme of our episode is going to be kind of, what was the word you used? Kind of willy-nilly. What did your client call it? Kind of hokey?
Oh yeah, foo-foo, up in the clouds, kumbaya.
Yeah, it's kind of foo-foo, but like I would argue there's a lot of kind of merit there. Essentially, that is biofeedback, is taking a tactile kind of input, using that tactile input reflexively to create a motor output. And that is like incredibly complicated and fun to think about and talk about the neurophysiology. But the reality is like, it doesn't need to be, you know, it's kind of like a concept of visualization or just general practice. Like the more you think about the success of doing something physically and the more you go through that practice and then step back and reflect on it, the more success you're going to have. So to answer that question, I guess that's a long answer to say I don't know. But, you know, it's something that I'll have to put more thought into moving forward, because so much of how I'm trained and how maybe a lot of therapists, musculoskeletal therapists are trained is do these exercises, get stronger, build kind of tissue capacity that way. And then you can kind of carry that over into the fitness world where, you know, there's a lot of programs out there from like, you know, functional movement screening and so forth, and where it's like a lot of attention to movement quality. But yeah, I think when you start kind of applying it to what you're talking about, I mean, that would be such a novel thing. You'd kind of have to tinker with it to get something really relevant in that sense.
Yeah. Another shout out to those guys down at Cal State and April to work.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can be the et al. Because we, in the research, we've kind of like, you know, claimed proprietal or intellectual property now on this idea. So
we've created the research question. Now it's up to the really smarty pants to go do it.
Yeah, that's it. Good luck, April. I'm too old to figure it out. Totally.
All right. Well, we got another sponsor ad spot. So hold on one second. Police interview 12 with Mr. C. Otter of Monterey, California. Go ahead, Mr. C. Otter.
So, I was minding my own business, snacking on my urchin, when out of the blue came this human on a white plank. He looked like he wasn't even breaking a sweat, singing, surfingpaddling.com, surfingpaddling.com. Paddling is so easy now thanks to surfingpaddling.com. I mean, he had absolutely no regard for the Marine Mammal Protection Act. 50 feet, dude! The audacity!
Man, that's awesome. Was that Ethan?
That was Ethan. Yeah.
Nice.
Their voice acting is on par, man.
Yeah, we're going to have to double their pay or get them some kind of kickback.
Well, I tell you, we got a good deal. Those were like 40-second spots. I mean, that's a big deal.
Yeah, that is a big deal. I'm blown away with that.
All right, man. Last segment is what I like to call "Don't Bogart My Spot, Man." It's about surf travel, and I just was wondering, do you have a memorable moment from a surf trip that you've taken in the 20 plus years you've been surfing?
Yeah, good question. I mean, there's a lot of them. I mean, I'm pretty blessed in the sense that I've been given a physically capable body and have been able to make time in my late teens and 20s to get out of the country and surf. And I was fortunate enough to take a year off between my undergraduate degree and physical therapy school and travel around and kind of be a bum and go surfing. But I mean, man, so many cultures and experiences, and to really kind of boil it down, like maybe one of the more quintessential moments I've had as a surfer came in 2012. Rob, you know this, but in 2012, I flew out to the North Shore of Oahu and took almost 6 weeks off of work to work the Vans Triple Crown event. And it was a really novel and neat experience as a physical therapist, working in the booths at each one of these events, and being one of two physical therapists that got to do that alongside. We had a couple chiropractors, an osteopath. We had an emergency room doctor and kind of emergency personnel like EMTs. We had a massage therapist sometimes and an acupuncturist. I mean, it was like a holistic clinic on the beach, and that in itself was just an amazing experience. But my classic kind of North Shore moment was I flew into Hawaii and rented my car and drove out to the North Shore. And the doctor that was hosting me kind of had me up in his kind of suite. Like I never saw pictures of it or anything like that. But what I came to learn was it was kind of in this in-process remodeled garage. So like I had a place to stay that had a shower and a bed, but it was essentially a garage with kind of like a wall being in the process of being constructed between these two things, and which was fine, it was great. I was happy to be there. And I had never met the doctor. His name is Dr. Lee Lindau. He's a great doctor on the North Shore and still puts together a lot of the health care crew at these events. He's a great guy. And I had never met Lee Lindau. I had spoken with him on the phone and had emails with him. And so never met him face to face. And so I fly in at night, I crash out, and then I get this knock on the garage door at like 5 a.m. And we have to be at one of the surfing events at I think it's like 7:30 to kind of get ready and set up and all that kind of stuff. And I'm like, kind of jet lagged and half asleep, and I open the garage door and he's standing outside with 2 surfboards, and one of them is like a 9.6 gun and the other one's about a 9.0 gun, and he's all, "Hey Jim, nice to meet you. You want to go surf with me real quick?" And I'm like, what? And we're kind of purchased right in front of a spot on the North Shore called Leftovers. His house is there, and just north or east of that spot is kind of like a big wave spot called Alligators. And I'm not a big wave surfer by any means. And he's like, "Oh, I'm gonna go get some at Alligators before we have to go to work." And you know, I have my coffin bag with boards, and the biggest board I have is like a 7.2, and I was just like, it was dark, and I was like, I don't know, man, like maybe I'll kind of hunker down and watch you. And I watched this guy paddle out at like dark 30, catch 4 or 5 like 20 to 25 foot faced waves, come in like no big deal, and then we just packed up and went to the event. And that it kind of hit me like, I'm on the North Shore now, man. Like I'm not ready to be here.
Oh, dude, that's awesome! I love that story.
Yeah. What about you?
I could pull up a similar North Shore story, but I was thinking our trip to Bhutan was a really fun surf trip. Like
that, yeah.
I've been really lucky to travel, all over the world and go to these top spots in the world and really experience the culture and realize how lucky I am to be where we're from and to have the experiences and opportunities we have. But sometimes just going close to home with a couple buds, not really expecting the best surf in the world, is some of the most fun. And you were on this camp trip. We had a couple other friends, and I remember it was like late fall. We weren't expecting good weather. Didn't it rain? Yeah, it rained. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it rained pretty hard. But then like the next day, so you came down, we surfed this really awesome spot in North Santa Cruz. I'm not going to say where it was, but we got it really good. And there were only a handful of guys. And then you came down on Saturday, and we surfed Gazos. I'll say Gazos because nobody's going to believe us. I'll tell you that. And it's right outside of Butano State Park where we were camping. And we just set up camp all day there. It was insane. I never expected that. It was the wind went offshore. I'll put up photos. People won't believe us that was that spot. It looked like Indo. Not that it was Indo, but it was like amazing. And we had it all to ourselves, just trading waves. And even when it got not so good, it was just as fun. And then of course at night sitting around the campfire, talk story, and it was just, I think those kinds of trips are needed. Other than these, like, I love the big, extensive week, 2 week, month trips to far off places. Amazing experiences, but sometimes just having like something down the road and just going overnight somewhere is with the right people can be just as fun. So that one, what did the guy call us again? I keep forgetting.
Yeah, that's where we formed our gang known as the Barbecue Crew.
The Barbecue Crew.
Yeah. But we changed the name from the Barbecue Crew to the Coleman Stove Crew.
Yeah, the Stovetop Crew.
The Stovetop Crew.
Yeah, the guy paddles out. The guy paddles out next to. Yeah. There was like one guy that paddled out. There was like 4 or 5 of us, and then this guy paddles out. And was like, "Hey, you guys with that Barbecue Crew?" And Jim's like, "Yeah, what's it to you?"
Yeah, because for those that don't like know where that is, it's kind of in the middle of nowhere. And Rob and a few of our buds, we had surfed it like all morning for like, I want to say 3 or 4 hours at least. And then we went back up to our car, and I had a Coleman stove, and we busted out the cooler, and we're like, screw it, we're making breakfast like right here, right? And so it turned into an all-day affair at the beach with this like Coleman stove in the parking lot with our table and all our like cooking supplies. And I think it was after that brunch, I was first one back out in the water, and a local from Santa Cruz had driven up, and he paddled out with his like standard salty look, and I think he was kind of sizing me up in the water. And I think you guys had kind of like peppered him with some like nice attitude in the parking lot. Like I think I later found out you guys offered him a sandwich, and so he paddles out, kind of gives me the stink eye, and just goes, "You with the Barbecue Crew?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'm with the Barbecue Crew," and all tension was diffused, and we just like were able to talk to each other there and kind of be normal people.
Dude, it was insane. That's
so it just goes
rad.
to show you, you know, all you got to do is, you know, be nice to people and offer them a sandwich from time to time.
Offer them a sandwich, some bacon and stuff. It was crazy because we started making lunch thinking, oh, we're just going to, you know, open beers in the parking lot and be those salty guys that look at the sea in the afternoon. I don't want to go back to the campsite. You know, we ended up paddling back out and had 3 sessions that day.
We had 3 sessions. Yeah, I think I mean, to this day, I mean, that was maybe 3+ years ago now, but yeah, I mean, that was like, you know, 8+ hours in the water, which I've yet to do to this day. So
yeah,
that trip actually was the trip that said, you know what, like, I'm done with this one wetsuit game. Like,
oh yeah,
you know, there's nothing worse than putting on a cold, sandy wetsuit in November in California, and you're like, oh, I gotta put this thing on again. Like, I mean, you know, you talk about.
It was wet from the day before too, because I think that was Sunday, was the barbecue day, and we had an all day Saturday too.
Yeah, that was an epic trip for sure, and epic in the sense like, yeah, it wasn't you know, Sand Point, Mexico, but it was like epic because I think for me, our expectations were so low. And, you know, you talk about pressure differential, like the reality of my expectations, like there was such a difference between what was happening and what I thought was going to happen. That, that alone created a lift, right? Like I was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing, right? And whereas like, if you fly to Mexico, like your expectations are super high, and if they don't get met, you're kind of like, I got skunked, and nah, not really. It just didn't kind of satisfy what what you kind of like, you know, predestined in your mind. So
absolutely, man.
Yeah.
But
you're right.
I want to write a whole book called "Keep the Bar Low,"
There you
and
go.
that's the key to happiness.
That's right. Homer Simpson said, "There's a lesson there, and it's never try."
Oh man, I hope nobody takes that actual advice from us. That's terrible.
Yeah, we're gonna have to call April Denny and really make sure she doesn't listen to this podcast.
April needs to set the bar high, but we are gonna set it low.
Yeah,
every time.
That's right.
Well, thanks again, Jim. We wasted another hour of our lives talking surfing and science and math, and I appreciate your time. I appreciate your knowledge and your questions, and I appreciate everybody out there listening and watching. Thank you guys so much. Make sure you get a hold of us. Let us know how we're doing, because like we said last week, we don't know what we're doing, and we need some guidance. So help us out, please. But thank you guys so much. Have a wonderful rest of the week, and you want to do this again next week?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, let's do it. All right, see you guys.
Take care, guys.